What's up everyone, Brenden here once again bringing you all another episode of Gaming Details. This week's video is a very special one as this is our 20th episode of the series. The Gaming by Gamers crew and I just want to give a huge thanks to all of you who support us by watching our videos, subscribing and becoming members of the channel, and simply enjoying the content we put out. None of this would be possible without the support from you all. So in this week's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Red Dead Redemption, as this one was suggested to us by so many of you. So without further delay, let's jump right into the details. Kicking off our list in Red Dead Redemption 2, something that you might not have noticed before is that the eyes of characters will dilate and constrict when in sunlight or darkness. Rockstar is notorious when it comes to adding subtle yet very realistic details in many of their games, especially in the more recent ones like GTA and Red Dead. Take a look at these two images. In the first one, you'll see how in sunlight, Arthur's pupils are constricted as they would be from all the light surrounding him. In the second photo, in the darkness, his eyes are dilated to absorb more light. With the advancement of graphics and game developing software, it's opened many doors for game creators to really push the limits and add incredible details like this. Up next, let's take a look at the double-barreled shotgun in Red Dead Redemption 2. In real life, early designs of this weapon used two independent triggers, one for each barrel. Later models for the double barrel used a mechanism called the single selective trigger, which allowed for one trigger to be used to shoot both barrels one after the other, but never at the same time. With Red Dead 2 being set in the year 1899, it's very fitting for the first version of the weapon with the two independent triggers to be used in this game, as the single selective trigger wasn't invented until the year 1901. As a bonus, when firing the weapon in-game, your character will actually move their finger to the second trigger after the first in order to fire both shots. Moving on to our third detail, next time you're playing Red Dead 2 and have a few moments to spare in the morning hours of the game, try looking inside of a store before it's opened and you may see the clerk performing a checkup before the start of the day. This is one of those details that makes the game feel so alive, unlike other games where the NPCs just sort of stand around looking aimlessly until you walk up or interact with them. Details like this are what make each character, whether they're a main or background, feel like they're individuals with actual lives happening in the game. Continuing on our list, this next detail showcases not only the extremely accurate hitboxes Red Dead has to offer, but also the realization from the developers that guns are in fact objects that can be hit with bullets too. While being involved in a shootout, you may or may not have had the odds work out where the gun on your back or in your hand gets hit with a bullet. This doesn't happen often, but when it does, it'll surely catch you by surprise the first time around, as it did with us. For our next detail, in Red Dead Redemption 2, we see a character demonstrate the proper way to walk behind a horse safely. In this clip, he shows how you should always keep at least one hand on the horse while walking around it so that it knows you're there and doesn't get spooked. This is exactly what you would do if you were handling a horse in real life, because believe me, you do not want to get kicked by one. There are also certain moments in the game where you can see people changing their horse's shoes and end up getting killed by the kick. Speaking of horses, this next detail on our list shows how when they get exhausted or have low health in game, they will begin to lose their balance and struggle to remain still. Horses in Red Dead Redemption 2 are sort of like cars but with 4 legs and hair. If you want your horse to run like a well-oiled machine, you need to make sure you take care of it by feeding it, brushing it, and giving it rest when it's exhausted. Another detail on our list that's sort of similar to the last one shows how if Arthur whistles for his horse too many times in quick succession, he will need to catch his breath before doing it again. Just another cool example of the developers displaying exhaustion in its characters, making them feel more like real people. As a bonus, we'd also like to point out that if your horse is close enough to you, Arthur will call to it rather than whistling. Yep. Onto our 8th detail for this list, we're going to take a look towards the night sky. If there's ever been a game that goes above and beyond in the scenery department, it's Red Dead 2. Everything from the breathtaking mountain ranges to the wildlife-filled nature paths are a pure treat for the eyes to absorb. One of my favorite things to look at, however, is the clear and incredible view of the heavens that hang overhead at night. Since this game obviously takes place in a time where there was basically zero light pollution, you can see hundreds of stars including the Milky Way galaxy. But the main detail in this is that you can actually see real constellations and star locations that you'd find in real life, such as the Big Dipper, Orion's Belt, and the North Star. Continuing on our list, in the mining town of Ansburg in Red Dead Redemption 2, you can see that the water surrounding the area is quite polluted. In real life, water gets heavily polluted near factories and mills due to the dumping of dirty water, oils, and especially sewage and other types of waste. Efforts to contain the waste were most likely poor, as people probably didn't realize the long and short-term effects such impurities had on the environment. Up next, we have a pretty clever detail that shows while using Eagle Eye, some drunkards, especially Sean and the Reverend, will glow and leave behind trails because they reek so badly of alcohol. Eagle Eye is normally used to track the scents and trails of animals while you're hunting. The smell of booze on an alcoholic can be quite overwhelming, so it's no joke that you could probably smell them from a mile away. Moving on to our 11th detail, we have another quick one which shows how Arthur will lift his gun above his head while traversing through the water. If a gun gets wet, it can cause corrosion and also wear away any lubricants, ultimately causing damage to the weapon over time and potentially making it unsafe to use. This is an excellent detail and great display of the proper way to maneuver through potentially harmful terrain. And now to take the spotlight away from Red Dead 2 for a moment, we'll be heading over to the first Red Dead Redemption for this next detail. During a poker game gone bad, everyone at the table draws their weapon on each other, and a German character says,
"There must be a name for this."
An impasse, sir. An impasse.
An impasse is a situation where neither party can reach an agreement and end up in a deadlock. So the name of the situation Mueller was looking for was the good old Mexican standoff, which means that he didn't know of it either because he's German or that the phrase had not been coined yet at the time. Heading back to the start of the show for our next detail, in Red Dead Redemption 2, trees and telephone poles will show realistic burn damage if they are to catch on fire. Take a look at these images of a burnt telephone pole from in-game and real life side by side, and you can see how accurate it is for yourself. And for those of you wondering, yes, telephones were already invented at this point in time, as the game is set in 1899, and the very first version of the telephone had been around since as early as 1849. So there's some history to go with your details. Up next, for our 14th spot on the list, we have another quick detail which shows how Arthur will sometimes lower his head while riding his horse underneath trees to avoid getting hit in the face. This one is sort of a hit or miss, as he doesn't duck underneath the branches all the time, but nonetheless is still a cool detail because, let's be honest, you wouldn't want to get slapped in the face by tree branches while riding a horse either. Moving on to the next detail, in Red Dead Redemption 2, during the time that the game is set in American history, the country only had 45 states. This is never talked about in-game, but if you go to Fort Wallace, you can see an American flag flying with only 45 stars. This is the only time an American flag shows up in-game, and it was smart of Rockstar to keep the historical accuracy, as at the time, Oklahoma, New Mexico, Arizona, Alaska, and Hawaii were not part of the United States. Heading to the next detail, sometimes you just need to kick back and drink with your friends. In Red Dead Online, you may not have noticed that the more drunk you get, the more the words become distorted. If you get even drunker, it starts to become completely unreadable. And now, onto our final detail of the video. This is going to be a spoiler for Red Dead Redemption 1 and 2, so if you haven't played those yet and still want to, skip to this part in the video. Okay, now that that's out of the way, in the epilogue of Red Dead 2, while playing as John Marston, you build the farm you see in the first game, which is also the barn where John meets his fatal end. If you go to the barn in Red Dead 2 and walk out to the same spot, the music will fade away and you will only hear the ambient noise of the animals and the wind. Well, that's all the time we have for today's episode of Gaming Details. I really hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can be notified as soon as our latest videos come out. If you have a suggestion for a future episode of Gaming Details, leave it in the comments below. Thank you all again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.